Hello again. That was quite a long walk actually. Still up on stage alongside of the lectern. The only difference is we've got a completely different view here because we now have a view, in fact I'll step out a shot, we now have a view of the room. Now the room hasn't been set up yet, obviously. The tables and chairs are there with the tablecloths. This is a relatively small function or event, but as I said earlier, it's still important that you absolutely nail your presentation and prepare as best as you possibly can. This is a function with around about 100 people, perhaps a little less than that. It'll be a nice intimate gathering, and for whoever is presenting at this particular function, I'm sure they'll do a good job. They need to do a good job because everyone in this room will be watching and listening off every word of the person standing behind the lectern. I want to talk a little bit about the sorts of things you need to do prior to your presentation. I do these things myself. I think they're important. So let's say, for example, you are an entrepreneur, a young entrepreneur, and let's say you've been asked to speak at a corporate event about your journey, your experiences, about the sorts of things that you've gone through which have been difficult and how you've got over those, how you've overcome those things, which is always a good topic to talk about no matter what topic you are involved in. Issues, getting over those issues, it's always good to do that. So let's say, for example, you're speaking at this particular event. The first thing that I would want to know is the demographic of the audience. Now you might think, well hang on, they're obviously entrepreneurs. Yes, they are. But I'd like to know something a little more specific. How old are they? How much experience have they had? So it might be that they could be a room full of 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, for all I know. It might be that they are all male. It might be that they are all female. It might be that they are elderly. I mean that in a sensitive way. I don't mean that offensively. It might be that they are in the latter stages of their career. It might be that it's mixed, male, female, all ages. And so I'm not suggesting that you need to change your presentation dramatically depending on the audience, but you may need to change it slightly. And I'll give you an example. So I speak about addiction and mental health issues, and I do that through lived experience. Just recently I spoke to a group of footballers, 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old footballers at a club here in Adelaide. So when I spoke extremely passionately, and it was quite aggressive and very pointed, and I swore a few times. Now, I did that because I was comfortable with doing that in front of that particular audience, and I spoke to the president of the football club prior to, and I said, would that be okay? He said, that's fine, that would work okay. But if I was presenting that to a corporate group here, for example, and they weren't footballers, they were businessmen and women, I would certainly tailor that presentation differently. I wouldn't swear, I wouldn't be as aggressive, and I would probably change the direction of it. It would still have the same impact, I would hope, and it would still have the same message, but it would just be presented differently. Do you understand what I mean? So that's why it's important you understand your audience, and a lot of people forget about that, and they turn up and they go, whoops, okay, a lot of elderly ladies here, I have some dirty jokes to tell. No, it doesn't work, but you need to prepare for that. So that's really important. Now, the second thing that I tend to do, not tend to do, I always do, is I come down to the function centre, the convention centre, the entertainment centre, the hotel, wherever it is that I'm presenting. I try and get down there a day beforehand, or at least the morning of the presentation. Let's say I'm doing it in the evening, so that I can check the room out. And you might think, well, why would you bother? Why would you do that? Because there are a number of things that are really important. And generally I will meet the person who is setting the room up. So the first thing I find out is, where am I sitting? And if I'm presenting, quite often if you have an organisation that's not that experienced, they may put you right up the back. So when you're invited up on stage, it takes you forever to get up on stage. It's only a little thing, but it's important. So I prefer to be able to sit somewhere close to where I'm standing now, which is alongside of the lectern or on the stage. And that's important to me. It's all part of my mantra, I guess. It might not be important to you, but it's important to me. And so I like to check out where I'm sitting. I also like to have a look at the mic setup. Now, you're getting a good look at this actually. So this is obviously the lectern, clearly. There's another microphone here, and I'll run through how this all works in a second. Obviously you would have your notes sitting here if you were using notes, and the lectern would have a light which you could turn on or off, which would make it easier for you to read the notes if it was dark, obviously. Otherwise it would be a disaster for you. So I'd always check to see the mic setup. Now in this case, because I am an entrepreneur and I am going to present in front of other entrepreneurs, and because I'm doing it by myself and not being interviewed, then this is a good setup. This is a great setup. So I'm happy with those two microphones. Now, if I was being interviewed, for example, rather than a standalone presentation, then it's important that there is a secondary microphone. And the reason for that is if you only have this and there are two people behind the lectern and one is interviewing the other, from the front looking toward us, it's awkward. And quite often we need to do that, which makes it a little easier, but it's still a little awkward because you're quite close together. So what I like to do is, if I'm being interviewed, is either stand behind the lectern and use these mics, and the host would use this and stand over here, or something like this, or the other way round, or the other way round. In other words, I would use the microphone and the host who is interviewing me would stand behind the lectern. That is really, really important. So the mic setup is really important. As an extension to that, it's also important that you build a short-term relationship with the person who is in charge of audio on the night. And you need to speak to them and treat them with respect. And the reason for that is because they are in charge of what goes to air. So if they're not on the money and you get up and say, "Hi everyone, I'm Mark Aston," and the mics aren't on, it doesn't start the whole process all that well. It can be very frustrating and can put a lot of people off and can ruin what they do from that point on. So you need to build rapport with the person that's looking after the audio. And you certainly need to do an audio check, but that generally happens probably an hour or so before the presentation. But you could do an audio check if you were there the morning beforehand, or even the day beforehand, possibly. But as I say, that's generally done a little bit closer to the presentation. So they're the things that I like to check. I also like to check on, in a general sense, what the room looks like, where the tables are positioned, where everyone's going to be seated, how many people are in the room. And once I've done that, I feel comfortable and I'm ready to turn up for my presentation.